Ilongo, also known as Hiligaynon, Ilongo originates from the city of Iloilo, near as I can understand. Iloilo in Ilongo means it has to do with rivers. An ilog is a river, so Iloilo would have been a shortened version of the name of a big river, basically the Grand River. And there is a huge river that runs through Iloilo. So it migrated over to Negros Island on the occidental side. The island's divided into two sides based on language. You get up to the top of the island and it switches abruptly from Ilongo to Cebuano. And the people don't understand each other from one side to the other, so it gets a little tricky. In fact, after serving on the Cebuano side, I came back to the Ilongo side and laughed my head off because I thought they sounded hilarious. It's very tonal language. They sound almost like they're singing when they speak, and so it was a little different, and it was hard to pick up the tone and not sound ridiculous, at least to my ears. But that's part of how they speak, and so it's it's a part of their language, and it just doesn't sound right if you don't. Cebuano is spoken very directly, very, I don't know, brusquely, but Ilongo is very tonal, very sing-songy, and it's a very interesting language. It's just one of many dialects, and there are similarities between the languages. Some words are similar, but many of them have completely different meanings, or they have completely different words. Conjugations are similar, but different enough that you can't really just switch from one to another. In fact, switching from language to language was really pretty difficult. It would take anywhere from 3 weeks to a month of being immersed in it to get to the point where I was starting to feel comfortable with my ability to speak and understand it. It usually took 2 to 3 months to feel fluent in it, or to have people tell me I sounded fluent in it. So it was a struggle going from language to language, but Ilongo was an easier language to speak in a lot of ways. It rolled off the tongue easier. Maybe it has something to do with the way they intonate and things. Cebuano was a lot harder to speak. It was lots of R's and harder pronunciations. Ilongo is a little more musical in that sense, and so it rolls off the tongue a little bit easier. Greetings are pretty much the same in all the language. You say "Cómo está?" It has kind of a Spanish influence, but "Cómo está" is hello, how are you? That's just kind of how you greet people. You can say good morning, mayong aga, good evening, mayong gabi. Those are just some of the common greetings. It's a pleasant language to speak. Like I said, it rolls off the tongue pretty nicely. I wish I remembered more of it, but it's been a while. So, Cebuano is another fun one. I did spend 6 months speaking that, so I got pretty fluent in it. They speak very quickly, and half the time they shorten things up. They chop their sentences to the point where it's really kind of hard to follow them at times. In Cebuano, you would say "Kumusta ka bay?" That's how you doing, friend. But they would say "Mustabay," and they would just chop it off like that. Half the time people wouldn't complete sentences, and so it was really hard to follow where their train of thought was going, and they speak really, really fast. Ilongos take their time, they're slow, they're sing-songy, so it was really easy to follow along with them. Karaya, which is spoken on the island of Panay, it's heavy R's, lots of R's. You roll your R's a lot, and there's a lot of R's. In fact, they take certain letters out of the alphabet and replace them with something else. And then Aklanon, which is one I didn't get to learn, thank goodness. You have to speak as though you have no tongue. Everybody's favorite phrase in Aklanon was "Ro angwang naga ogo og sha ogo ogan." That means the carabao is rolling in the mud. So That was one I'm really glad I didn't have to learn. It usually took people 6 to 8 months just to become familiar with enough that they felt comfortable speaking it. So if you went to Aklan, you were there for a long time, and it was very difficult to learn. Ilongo was not that hard. Cebuano was not that hard. The Karaya that I did pick up was not all that difficult. Kapishnon is very similar to Ilongo. They have some different words and something. It's different enough that it's considered its own dialect, but it's fairly similar. And then one area I served in had a mix of Karaya, Ilongo, Kapishnon, Aklanon, and Tagalog, and some Cebuano in there as well. So it was a very difficult area. I felt like I was a brand new missionary. I'd been out for over a year when I arrived in that area, and I couldn't understand anybody because they would use bits and pieces from every one of those languages in a single sentence. Their conjugations, their words, everything was just a mishmash of everything, and it was really hard to understand those people. And I spent about 6 months there and finally got the hang of it, but it was tricky. So going from place to place, even town to town, they will change words. Words will have different meanings. It's really hard to understand people from place to place because you'll think you know what they're saying, and it turns out it's not. And you have to be careful because some of the words mean something just fine in one and something incredibly vulgar in the other. So, you know, it brought its own set of challenges. Tagalog is the national language, and that in English. English is the language of business and government. Tagalog is the national language for pretty much everything else. So it's not quite as sing-songy. It's repetitive. The conjugations are highly repeated, and that's one thing I struggled with because it was just tongue-tying to try and speak it for me, because in Ilongo and Cebuano, conjugations are single syllable, where in Tagalog they'll duplicate it several times, and it changes the meaning. And so for me, Tagalog was a very difficult language to learn, you know, understanding-wise, and very difficult to speak. I got to the point where I could understand fairly well, but speaking it was a whole different matter. It's a much more broad language. You can say a whole lot more because of those conjugations and what they've done with it. It's a much more broad language, but it's very different from the languages I learned.